Hello and welcome to Hughes of the World, coming at you from deepest, darkest Durham. No, actually I'm in the middle of the outback. Look, there's Uluru behind me. No, really, I'm just in my basement in Durham. Welcome to the show. This is Hughes of the World, in which I talk about every country in the world in alphabetical order. Yay! So I'll be talking about the history, the culture, the geography, and all that kind of jazz. And you get to talk along with me because you get to appear in the little chat window that comes up on the left here. So if you want to say hello or g'day, mate, please do so. We've already got Chubby saying Graham is on Smoko as usual. I don't know what Smoko is, but there you go. Got Andrew Martin on Facebook saying hi from Luxembourg. Hello, Andrew. We've got Gerard saying, hey, looking forward to this new episode. Ooh. We've got Briz88 saying, fair dinkum. That could be short for maybe Brisbane 88, like the city, which is in Australia. Australia. G'day, cobbers. G'day, mate. Listen, so normally what I do in these kind of shows is I do a bit of research. I do a lot of research. I read a lot about the history of the place before I start waxing lyrical, just to make sure I get everything right and to make sure that I'm not getting my dates mixed up. And sometimes I do actually discover things that I didn't actually realise about some of the countries that I've been to before. Now, Australia is a little bit different because I used to live in Australia. So I've spent a lot of time in Australia. I've travelled all around Australia and I know it pretty well. So I've not made any notes. So I'm just going to wing this one. So if it's awful, I apologise profusely, but I'm going to try and incorporate your comments as much as possible, so keep them coming in. And if people want to tell me some interesting facts that you know about Australia, you can throw them into the comments and I will pick them up and run with them. Smoko is what Australians call snap. Graham is on Snap. Graham, sorry, Chubba, you're losing me totally here. What Snap? The card game? The card game Snap? I don't know. Is that the biggest rock in the world behind you? No, the biggest rock in the world is the one that I bought my fiance when we were getting married. That's a lie. I don't have a fiance, and I never have. And if I did, I wouldn't be able to afford a rock. Anyway, this is behind me is Uluru in the Northern Territory, the south of the Northern Territory. So, this is the flag of Australia over here, and you might recognise it as the flag of New Zealand, although it is a bit different because the Australian flag doesn't have Australia. Sorry, the New Zealand flag doesn't have Australia written on it. Well, that was the Australian flag. I wrote that on there in case you got confused. See the big star underneath the Union Jack flag? I'm going to call it the Union Jack flag from now on because people go, it's not a Union Jack, it's flown from Jack stuff. And I go, all right, whatever. But yeah, the Union flag, underneath that, there's a star. That is the star of the Federation. So I think that was adopted in 1901 when Australia became a federation of states. And if you look at the cross, the Southern Cross, because that is the cross. If you come across a cross that is the cross, that is the Southern Cross. On the New Zealand flag, it's only got 4 stars. It doesn't have the little fifth one. The little one doesn't have that. And the stars are red on the New Zealand flag, and they have white borders. But apart from that, exactly the same. And the Southern Cross appears on lots of other people's flags as well. You'll be surprised. There's lots of flags around the world that also have the Southern Cross on them. I think if you look very, very closely at the flag of Brazil, you might see the Southern Cross on there. You might. I just might be making it up. There's lots of stars on the flag of Brazil. So what are we getting in from the messages here? We've got hi there from Dublin. Hi, Joe. How's it going? That's my animator friend, Joe, there. We've got Gaz Riley saying g'day. G'day, mate. Gaz is a fellow Scouser and an explorer of the world. Thomas Page says, I thought Smoko was a smoke break. I don't smoke. I never have, never will. Chubby, I don't have the money. I keep telling people this. They're like, you don't do all this exciting stuff, Graham. And I'm like, yeah, it's because I'm too busy spending money on things that I think are exciting, like music festivals and travelling. Cooper's beer, the best in Oz. Ooh, fighting talk. That where I come from, Gaz, because we're all Foster's drink. No, we're not. I'm joking. What did we drink? We drank VB when I was in Melbourne, which stands for Victoria Bitter, but it's actually a lager, so I don't know why they call it Bitter. But there you go. VL was already taken by the Trademarks Commission. I don't know. But I always found that the next day when I went to the loo, yeah, not great. I'm trying to rein in that. I think there was a Western Australia beer called Little Creatures. That was all right. I think. But I remember being at a party once, and I drank all my beers, as I have a tendency to do, and I picked up a Stella. Now, Stella in the UK is like, it's wife beater. It's called wife beater because it's a sick joke that it's this cheap alcohol that gets you really drunk. And in Australia, it's like a boutique. It's like boutique posh alcohol because it comes from Europe, and I didn't realise, and I drank someone's Stella, and I still feel bad about that to this day. Sorry, Linda. Anyway, so moving swiftly on. I've got some more messages coming in. Smoke is a break like morning tea. Oh, there you go. Now I know. Thanks, Briz88. Jeremy Goff saying, in Walter Matilda, a jolly jump book is a sheep, if you didn't know. Full of this rubbish. Well, Jeremy, that is an interesting fact. And a jolly swagman is someone who went around the countryside looking for work during the Great Depression of the 1890s, I think. Not the actual Great Depression of the 1930s. That was a separate Great Depression. There were two of them. I think that was one of the 90s as well. The 1990s. James Squire, 150 lashes must be an honourable mention. Okay, I'll have to check that out. Chubai says Bolton red back from Melbourne. We've also got Vincent Frail saying, good evening. Is New Zealand close to Australia? A massive earthquake just to the north of North Island. Looks like in line with Brisbane to the west. Bloody hell, breaking news. There's been a massive earthquake off the coast of New Zealand. Shit. Maybe I should go over to the news desks and check out what is actually happening. I think I should I should definitely close some of these windows that I've got open here because it's just going to be using my bandwidth. But yeah, oh my God. I'm sorry, I'm going to check this out. Nothing's up on the homepage yet of the BBC, but they are a bit slow, especially when it comes to something that's not fawning over the government. But I'm not here to talk about the BBC. I'm here to talk about Australia, the great southern continent. So Australia was first inhabited about 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago. Can you imagine that long ago? I mean, we come from a world where tastes change within the matter of weeks, if not days. Oh, that's so yesterday. And yet, for 50,000 years, people lived in Australia, which is quite remarkable. And they got over there through a land bridge. So maybe I should talk a little bit about the geography of Australia and how it came to be the way that it is today. And it's a glorious place, Australia, geographically, and it's very pick-outable in the map. You see the shape of Australia, you know that it's Australia. Other countries, some countries are more recognisable than others, especially islands are. But I find a lot of countries that have straight lines and they can be quite much of a muchness. But Australia is kind of unique in that way, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to turn on my map. Here we go. Look at this. I've been working on this and trying to get it looking a bit more snaz. But there you go. That's the map of the world there, the North Atlantic Ocean. And I'm slowly going to turn the globe around here until we reach Australia, which is in the southern hemisphere there. And I'll zoom in here. This is fun. And there we have, you can see New Zealand down here, and this is Tasmania down here, and you have Australia, which is split into Western Australia, which is a good third of Australia is in Western Australia, but nearly all of this is empty. And then you've got the Northern Territory up here, which has got Darwin at the top, and you've got the Southern Australia here, which is Adelaide around here, which is where they go in Neighbours to Die. This down here, you can see there's a little squiggly line that separates New South Wales, capital Sydney, with Victoria, which is capital Melbourne, and just between the two of them is the ACT, which is the Australian Capital Territory, which is where Canberra is, which was a made-up capital like Brasilia is the capital of Brazil. They just sort of thought, let's have the capital here rather than in a city that people have heard of, because that would be crazy. Up here, we've got Queensland, and the capital city there is Brisbane over there, and Hobart is the capital of Tasmania. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can see a bit more of Australia, and you can see how little green there is. I mean, there's a bit round here, a bit of green down here, and then if I go down into Victoria, you can see, whoa, loads of green around there. Victoria's very green. That's where a lot of wine gets grown. Well, grapes get grown, wine doesn't get grown, I suppose. And then over here, Sydney, Brisbane, up the coast here. But I mean, the middle of Australia, oh my God, it is just pure desert. Now, Alice Springs is about here, and just a little bit to the south of Alice Springs is Uluru and Katajuta, which Katajuta is another kind of big rock formation in the desert, but it doesn't look like one big block. Did you know? I'll just fade across to you. Did you know that Uluru it carries on for 2.5 kilometers underground? True story. I think it's a chunk of Mars. I think it's just a big chunk of Mars. It just landed on Earth. It's very red. It's exceptionally red, which is kind of cool. I'm going to go back to the map in a moment, but before I do that, I'm going to get back into the chat, which is really small. I want to make the chat bigger because I've got it on my other screen today, and it's a bit smaller than it normally is, so I'm having to squint a little bit. Right, in Walter Matilda, we had that one. Irene Hughes says, hello, Graham. Hi, Mum. How's it going? We're doing Australia today. VB is good too, says Gaz Riley. Cheers, Graham, says Brenner. I just came off the Bin podcast with my friend Wayne in Basildon and Brenner and friends, which was fun. That started at about 8:30 around there sometime. So I've just come off that. So if you get a chance to look up the Bin podcast, I suggest you do. And Brenner, if you want to give me a link, I could sing and dance your link to your podcast because it's very funny and very good. And not just when I'm on it. Dog Bolton Redbeck from Melbourne. Oh, okay. Vincent Braille says, good evening. Oh, I've read that one. New Zealand is 1,500 miles away from us. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but relatively. If there's a tsunami, it can still get a long bloody way. Adam Wright said, met my girl at Lord's Lodge Backpackers in Prahan, Melbourne in 98. Took off for 8-month drive around the outside of Oz tour in a 1980 Ford Falcon. Happy days. Well, Adam Wright, that sounds very similar to my story. I met my Australian girlfriend, who we're not together anymore, but I met her in 1999 in Egypt, touring around the Middle East. And she was a backpacker. I was a backpacker. And a few years later, I went to Australia and we spent a few months traveling around Australia together in an old Holden panel van, which we call Monty. Well, I'll talk more about that a bit later on. Gaz Riley says, East Coast looks like a cat's head. Sorry, Senna, am I missing something? Says Jeremy. I missed what Senna was saying. Is that sheep with 55 kilos of wool? What? I liked it when Scott and Charlene got married. Pedro says, yeah, and then they moved to Adelaide and no one ever saw them ever again. Don't go to Adelaide. Aren't all capitals made up? Well, yeah, no, because some are where people just naturally gravitate and they'd say, let's stay. Okay, yeah, they're all made up. What artificial? It's like an artificial capital. No, that's still the same thing. I don't know. It just wasn't a place where people lived, and so they said, let's take this place where nobody lives and make it somewhere where people can live, like Milton Keynes. Joel and Jolly Fingers says, hi there. Chobai says, Western Australia is thought to have the largest trees on the planet till the European came. Well, yes, before the Europeans came, they had giant koalas, giant kangaroos, giant wallabies, and other giant animals, megafauna. Actually, no, it was well before the Europeans turned up, to be honest with you. It was before God, it must have been about 10,000 years ago. At least. Western Australia, I've read that one. Hi all, bit late joining. Greetings from Dublin, says Aidan. Hi, how you doing? Got Gaz saying, did you go to Broome, Graham? No, I didn't. So let's go back to the map. Should we go back to the map? Let's go back to the map. We're back in the map. Okay, so on the map here, you can see, I seem to have brought up Neve in Queensland. Where else can we see in Australia? So at the very tip here, this area here is called the Torres Strait. And there are islands in here, and the people who live there are called the Torres Strait Islanders. And if I go over here, we can see this massive lake. Look at this massive lake. This is Lake Eyre. Look at the size of this lake. It's like a lake the size of England. It's absolutely huge. But then if I go into the satellite picture, you'll see, it's a myth. There's nothing there. It just looks like a bird, doesn't it? That's coming that's falling from the sky on fire, like a firebird, but it's going to crash into Lake Eyre South. Anyway, so you can see here, it's just a load of salt. It only fills up once every sort of 20 years. It's a bit cheeky of the Google Map people to make it blue because it shouldn't really be blue. It should maybe be white. Over here is one of my favourite places in Australia. See this lake over here? Do you know what this lake's called? It's called Lake Disappointment. I don't know if you can read that on the side, but it does say Lake Disappointment. It's a bit of a disappointment that it's not written sort of horizontally as well. But yeah, that's a lake. And if I go onto the satellite view, you see there's not much there. Oh my God, it looks like there was a little bit of water. There was a little tiny slither of water when Google took the picture. And you can see over here, there's a bit of briny saltiness in the water. Great, fantastic. Thanks for that, Google. And yeah, Lake Disappointment is there. There's also a Mount Misery and there's also a Mount Hopeless in Australia, which I love. But there you go. Look at that. There's the most of it is desert Australia. It is a beautiful continent. And there you go. You got some wind. We've actually got some swirly clouds there, which is kind of cool. I don't know if they update that hourly, but there you go. There's Australia, and I will come back to you because I don't want to be boring you too much with the image of Australia. You know what Australia looks like. You know what Australia looks like. You know. So yeah, Aboriginals were there for 50,000 years, and then in about 1770, well, a bit before then, a guy called Abel Tasman, he came along. And he went along the south coast of Australia and charted the west and the south of Australia. No one knew what the east looked like. And he discovered Tasmania, and he called it Van Diemen's Land. Many years later, it was renamed Tasmania after Abel Tasman, who was the first European to go there. And yeah, he was he went there. But no one thought that much of Australia at the time. They just thought it was an inhospitable place. Nowhere to land your boat. A bit tellingly, the coast along the Great Ocean Road between Melbourne and Port Apollo Bay, but they say Apollo, is known as a shipwreck coast because all the ships got wrecked on it. It was a treacherous bit of land, treacherous bit of sea even hitting the land, and it wasn't until 1770. That a bloke called Captain Cook, James Cook, turned up, and he landed in Botany Bay, I think, and that became what would eventually become Sydney. But he landed there, and he went, "This looks great," and he stayed there for a couple of weeks while he fixed his boat, I think. Anyway, I haven't pushed up on this, so sorry if I get the dates wrong or the facts. But yeah, he went, "Okay, this is good." Put a British flag in there, and up to that point, it was known as New Holland. Australia was known as New Holland, and he decided to rechristen it New South Wales. Not North Wales. Yeah, screw those people from Conway. Land Dudno. South Wales. New South Wales. And I always feel bad for North Wales. You've got New England in America. You've got New Britain off the coast of Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. You've also got New Ireland off the coast of Papua New Guinea. And you've got Nova Scotia, New Scotland, and you've also got... that's not enough. New Caledonia, which also means New Scotland, and you've got New Hibernia, I'm sure, somewhere, which means New Ireland. And yeah, no one ever thought to name anywhere after North Wales. New North Wales never happened, sadly. Maybe the people who moved to Argentina from Wales should have called their new territory New North Wales. That would have been good. Right, back into the comments for a moment before I get myself into any more trouble. I didn't like Canberra, says Gaz Riley. Yeah, it's boring. Australia is wider than the moon. Interesting fact. Well, fairly. Says David J. Duke Vengeance says, I could try and get a partner to go travelling. Nah, I'm too busy on the internet. Edgelord. Well, Duke, just go on your own. That's what I do. You always meet people along the way. Joey says, Ditto went around in a Mark III Cortina. Yes, look, old bangers are the best, man. We're really doing this. We're doing this thing. According to the QI, the Chinese were there first. Well, the Aboriginals were there first, but okay. Maybe the Chinese... Joey says, when travelling through the outback and camping, where water pumps are, the water had a salt taste to it. Yeah, probably. The whole place is pretty salty and pretty irony. The reason why it's so red out in the outback is because there's lots of iron in the soil, which is very similar to Mars. So yeah, quite a Martian Martian territory. I'm going to go back to the map. I'm sorry, I'm not obsessed with maps, but I just want to tell you something because I think this is really interesting. You might not think it's very interesting, but I do. So there's Australia there, and you'll notice there's a bight taken out of Australia called the Great Australian Bight. And see that bit there? You'll never guess what country, what country in the world what used to be there. Well, I'll tell you, it used to be Madagascar. Madagascar used to be there. Well, no, Australia used to be here. Well, sort of Africa was here and Australia was attached to the side of it on it. So if you spin Australia onto its side and then slam it into Africa here, and then Madagascar was where the Great Australian Bight is, apparently. And also, when I was talking about the Aboriginals getting there 50,000 years ago, the sea levels were about 50 meters lower, so this was a lot of land. You still need to get in a boat to get over to Australia, but there was a point where Papua New Guinea and Australia were joined here, and so this came up like a little hammerhead above Australia, and then you could sort of island skip in small boats. You didn't need a big luxury liner to get from one place to the other. And the Australian Aboriginals have lived there for a bloody long time. There you go. And back to me, bring it back to me. There you go. Brilliant. So yes, we were just talking about the history of Australia. So when I say the history of Australia, it's difficult because you sort of pick up from the point where the Europeans turned up, and obviously Australia had a lot more history than that. But that only exists in the Dreamtime now. The Australian Aboriginals didn't keep any written logs, languages. Didn't keep any written words about their history. It was all an oral history, and they have some of the tribes have a thing where once people die, you don't talk about them again, and if you got photos of them, you throw the photos away. Because you don't want to upset the dead, I think. And as a result, Australian Aboriginal history, a lot of it has been lost. But it wasn't lost until Whitey came along, Europeans here, because we basically broke down the intergenerational way of them telling stories. But I'll come to that in a moment, because I'm just going to talk a little bit more about sort of the what the Europeans did. So Captain Cook was there in 1770, and then Britain had a bit of a problem in the 1780s. It just lost America. Whoopsies. I hate it when I lose in America. And it had nowhere to put its convicts. Nowhere. There's these boats full of convicts and nowhere to put them. So they went, so someone said in 1786, they said, well, why don't we send them to Australia? And they went, Australia, where's that? And he goes, New South Wales or New Holland, whatever the hell we're calling it now, the great southern continent, Terra Australis. Just there, that'll do. And they went, okay, that's a good idea. So 2 years later, they dropped the first load of convicts off at Botany Bay. It's a pretty grim situation. And people lived there, difficult lives. The people in charge basically just ran the place like a dictatorship. And people weren't allowed to grow their own crops. So as a result, they were completely dependent on food shipments coming from literally the other side of the world, which wasn't that smart. And it was a tough life. And it wasn't until probably the 1850s that anything really changed. And what happened in the 1850s was they found gold. Now, gold, I think people have known that gold was in Australia for a long time, but they didn't really go for it very much for three main reasons. One, I think they didn't have the tech. The mining tech wasn't there. Two, it was they didn't seem to find very much of it. And three, any gold you found had to be given to the government. But they changed that rule in like 1851. And within 6 months of them changing the rules, there were thousands and thousands of people streaming into Australia to go get the gold out of their hills. And places like Ballarat became the gold central of the world, effectively. This massive gold rush in Australia. It's lasted for a good few decades. I think Australia is where they found the biggest gold nugget in the world, which is called something like the Welcome Stranger. Someone can check that, can't they, on the internet. Back into the comments before I get too far behind in them. Australia border control is brutal. I think it inspired Bojo. Yeah, Jorg makes a good point there. You're coming from Europe. You've been on 2 flights. You might have been traveling for basically 24 hours solid. You get to Australia and they give you 20 questions. And it's just like, come on. I'm coming here to visit. No, I've got to ask you all these questions. Are you coming to work? No, look at me. Jesus Christ, do I look like I'm coming to work? I'm not. I'm just going to just bum around the place for a bit. I mean, you can't come here if you're going to... I don't want to come all this way to get a job that I could have got in the UK. Seriously. I mean, your wages aren't that good. Yeah, especially back in 2002 when I first went there. They were quite nice to me when I got there off a boat. They were quite nice. When I came in on a cruise ship or when I came in on a cargo ship to Australia, they were fairly nice then. But when I came in on a plane, on a big stinky plane, they didn't half give me a lot of grief about what I was up to and why I was there and blah blah blah. Canberra came about because Sydney and Melbourne fought over being the capital, so it was decided to create Canberra. That's true. Viz 88. And in fact, the old Parliament building is in Melbourne. It's a beautiful blue stone building, which is well worth checking out. It's in the Parisian end of Melbourne. Melbourne decided to knock down a load of its really nice buildings in the mid-20th century. I don't know why they decided to do that, but they used to have a Paris end of the city where they called it the Paris end because it was all sort of Parisian architecture with balconies and things. It was all lovely, and there's only a little bit left of it now, unfortunately. There's lots of stuff there that's a bit... New Zealand is the original Zealand is in Denmark. There's also a Zealand in the Netherlands as well. I'll have you know. Pedro Maverick says, don't worry, Deadpool and Mac are going to put North Wales on the map. Oh, yes, because they've brought Wrexham Football Club, haven't they? Pyrrhus says, Gaz Riley, New Zealand is named after the Dutch provinces of Zealand, not Denmark. You see, I just said that. Well, you've got two places called Zealand. Who's going to know? The capital of Bangladesh is Dakar. The capital of Senegal is Dakar, spelled differently, but, you know. And there's 4 countries called Congo. Not Congo, Guinea. There's 2 countries called Congo. There's 4 called Guinea. You've got Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, Equatorial Guinea, and Papua New Guinea. How many Guineas do you need? 4, obviously. Zealand is Dutch. Oh, we're going to have a big fight over Zealand now. We're not talking about New Zealand until we get to N for New Zealand, which is going to be in about 76 years' time. So, chill. Cool your boots. I was going to say Madagascar. Sorry, I forgot. Denmark and Holland are all the same to UK smugs. That's probably true, actually. Yes, but that's because British people are terrible, as we will discover as we talk about the history of Australia. So in the 1850s, big gold rush, and that sort of turned the fortunes around Australia. And in 1901, they were federated, which meant that the states in Australia got a Senate, and they had the same number of representatives, whether they were Tasmania, which only had 500,000 people living there, or whether it was Queensland, New South Wales, which has 8 million people living there. The population of Australia at the moment is 25 million people. So 25 million people live in Australia, in this massive continent island on the other side of the planet. And they love their superlatives. They love saying we're the biggest thing in the Southern Hemisphere, we're the tallest thing in the Southern Hemisphere, and we're the fastest thing in the Southern Hemisphere, we're the deadliest snake in the Southern Hemisphere. And that's because if you look at the globe, you find that most countries are in the Northern Hemisphere. Sorry, I'm not being northist, no, southist, well, whatever, but it's just a fact. It's just all of the land masses of the world seem to congregate in the north, and it's not half and half. People have a look at the map of the world, and they often think that the equator is way more north than it actually is. It's quite south on most maps, because under Australia, there's not much going on. So they usually position the equator so it's not quite in the centre of the map. They usually put it up a bit, down a little bit from where it would be if you put it in the middle. Anyway, so that's something about Australia. David Huado says, Australia, Graham, Kylie Minogue, I just can't get out of my head. Haha. Also, Russell Crowe is Australian. I think he's New Zealander. Can someone check on that? Can someone check? I think that Russell Crowe was born in New Zealand. Furthermore, I think that Nicole Kidman was born in Hawaii, and I think that Mel Gibson was born in somewhere else in America. Hashtag just saying. Kylie's Australian, though. Kylie is as Australian as the moon is long. Hi, Hughes. Can you talk about the Darwin Awards, please? Richard Prossett. Well, the Darwin Awards, I don't think they originated in Australia, but I can talk about Charles Darwin, who sailed to Australia on the HMS Beagle. A famous naturalist, and he's the guy who formulated the theory of evolution, and he did that while he was in the Galapagos Islands in the Pacific. But there is actually a state capital named after Darwin. And my favourite facts about Darwin is that him and Lincoln both share the same birthday. They were both born on February the 12th, 1809, and they both had beards, both had state capitals named after them. They're both on banknotes. Charles Darwin used to be on the back of the £10 banknotes. So there you go. True story. I went up to Darwin. Back in 2002. My first big trip around Australia. And there's beautiful little mangrove forest up there that they need to really protect. I went to the Kakadu National Park, which is fairly nearby. When you say things are nearby in Australia, you mean that's several hours away, but it's near. It passes for nearby as far as Australia is concerned. I wanted to go to Australia via the £10 offer in 1968, but I was too young, said Richard Prophet. Damn, man, that sucks. Were you a £10 pom you wanted to be? Chubai says, now you kind of go up Uluru. When I was there, the coach loads of people queuing up in the morning to go up. Some went up at midday, so almost had it to ourselves. Well, the problem with people going up Uluru wasn't necessarily that they didn't want people going up Uluru. It was that they didn't want people dying on Uluru because it brought them shitloads of bad luck of the local tribe. And let's talk about Aboriginals for a bit. Come on. Okay, let's talk a little bit about white Australia. So 1901 Federation, they also brought in the White Australian Act, which made sure that people who were immigrating into Australia, people who were coming to Australia, were coming from Europe, were white, because they didn't want people who were coming from South Asia or East Asia or anywhere where people aren't white. So they had this sort of racist thing going on. And that continued until... That continued. In 1967, Aboriginals were finally given citizenship, which is nice, to the Aboriginals who have been oppressed for ever since the white man got there. Finally, after 200 years, got the vote, I guess. Yay. But unfortunately, the damage had already been done. One of the things that the white Australians did when they got to Australia is they just decimated the Aboriginal population, not just with sort of like smallpox and measles and all these diseases that the Australian Aboriginals have never been subjected to, but also just by random cruel acts of cruelty. And the thing is, the Aboriginals, there wasn't one group who all spoke the same language, like in New Zealand, where you had the Maori. The Maori were all one people in New Zealand, so they could congregate, get together and say, oi, stop taking our stuff. Stop it. Stop taking our stuff. And so they had to get together and actually have a treaty in New Zealand between the Europeans and the people who were there before the Europeans turned up. Whereas in Australia, that was never seen as a requirement. They called Australia terras nullius, which meant it was unowned land, it was free land, nobody owned it, because the Australian Aboriginals were not seen as cultivators of the land. They didn't actually farm the land, they didn't have property deeds, they didn't have courts and things like this. But also the Aboriginals, we talk about them like there's one group of people called the Aboriginals, which is a bit unfair, because there used to be over 250 different tribes and 250 different languages, some as different as English is to Chinese. Okay, so really different languages, really different people from all over this continent were just all clumped together and said, oh, you're all the same now. There were 8 different languages on the island of Tasmania itself alone. And talking of Tasmania, I would like to point out that there are no Indigenous Aboriginals living from Tasmania living in Tasmania anymore. There's no people there who are pure Aboriginal, because they were wiped out. An entire island nation, if you like, of people who were decimated, well, worse than decimated, they're just not there anymore. They're a bit like the Caribs in the Caribbean. You might see one now and again, but you'd be very lucky to actually see one. So that is pretty much a stain on the conscience of a lot of Australians, and they will try and wiggle out of this by saying it was the British that did it, not the Australians, and I think we're all in it together. I think we all have to take equal share of the blame for the way that the Aboriginals have been treated. Even as far as the 1970s, there was a policy called what was it called? It was basically, they called it the Stolen Generations, but this policy that started in the 1920s, I think, and it was that if there was a child born to an Aboriginal woman and it wasn't clear who the father was, and the father might not have been Aboriginal, the father might have been European, then the state could legally take the child from their mother and give them to a white family to raise as a white person. And as I said earlier, Australian Aboriginal culture, it was all oral. It was all going on walkabout with grandpa, because the way they teach their children, which I love, is that they when you're in your 20s, your 30s, you're having kids, and you're like, yeah, but I need to go out and party and do crazy things and travel the world. I don't want to stay at home and feed children. And so what they did in Aboriginal culture, they said, well, hang on, I've got a great idea. And this was a great idea. They said, why don't we make the grandparents look after the kids at every generation? So when you become a grandparent, you look after the kids, because as a grandparent, you've got wisdom to impart. Yeah. And you've got a bit more patience, I guess. Worldly wisdom, patience comes with age. I don't know. But also, I mean, you've got a lot of free time on your hands because you're retired. You've got nothing better to do. So that seemed like a good plan for me. So while your parents are looking after your children, you're out hunting and gathering, actually. Not partying, but you're living your best life. And then when you're old and a bit slower and a bit more, cranky, you can look after the kids. And think about this in Western terms for a moment. When you get a lot of parents who are very sort of, oh God, I got children. Oh, they see it as an obligation. You see this when blokes in Britain, they say, oh, I've got to babysit the kids tonight. And I'm like, but they're your kids. And they're like, yeah, but the missus is going out to do this thing with her mates. I've got to babysit the kids. You don't babysit your own kids, mate. They're your bloody responsibility. If you can't do the time, don't do the crime, people. But yeah, the point is that if we get into their grandparents, they might have been terrible parents themselves, but as soon as they're grandparents, like, oh my God, shower this child in love and affection and sweets. It's funny that, isn't it? Anyway, so the Aboriginals picked up on that. The other thing the Aboriginals picked up on is the fact that people's brains aren't very good at remembering lists of things. What you want to do is you want to remember a story. And so what the Aboriginals taught, well, look, I'll say Aboriginals, I'm just as bad as everyone else because I'm saying, oh, there was just all one group of people called the Aboriginals, and they all had different religions, they all had different beliefs, they're all very different. But some Aboriginals had this idea that when you teach your children a fairy tale, the fairy tale is a map. So the fairy tale might be about the rainbow serpent, and it might go and lay some eggs. And where those eggs are, it's a map. It's where the rocks are. So you know where, okay, and by the rocks. And then the rainbow serpent went over to find the giant kangaroo. Where the giant kangaroo was, that's where the kangaroos like to hang out. And then there's a forest. And then there's a lake, a watering hole. And by knowing the story, you can put together a visual map of your area, which might be miles in any direction. So it's really, really useful. And that's something that they saw start mnemonics a lot sooner than Darren Brown and people who can do memory tricks, like memorize an entire deck of cards just by seeing them. It's just amazing. But they use the same techniques. Mnemonic people, what they call memory people, they use the same techniques as the Australian Aboriginals. They turn whatever list it is into a story, and by turning it into a story, they can remember it a lot easier. So there's a lot to be learned from Aboriginals. And the biggest one for me is land use. The Europeans didn't just bring over the infectious diseases. They brought over sheep. They brought over rabbits. They brought over dogs and cats and all kinds of crazy shit. They brought over bullfrogs on purpose. That wasn't even an accident. It was like, let's bring cane toads. Sorry, not bullfrogs. I'm thinking of The Simpsons. Cane toads were brought into Queensland on purpose because there was some fly that ate the cane, and they thought, oh, well, we'll let these toads in. And they absolutely decimated the Australian, the crops over there because they're not supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be there. We brought cows over. We took cows from the Northern Hemisphere, from Europe, and we put them in Australia. And they were like, moo. What's going on here? We took sheep. Bloody hell. Listen to these fluffy things on the mountains of Wales. And we took them to the bloody desert of New South Wales. Well, New South Wales is not too deserty, but you see what I mean. Like, they're covered in fluff. They're these little fluffy little balls of fluff. What are you doing putting them in the desert, you crazy bastards? And instead of, I don't know, farming kangaroos for the meat or the skin, but your hat and your nice leather jacket, they kept going with cows, and cows require loads of water. So they diverted rivers, and now the lakes are all drying up, and the Australian Aboriginals are just sitting there going, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing? And they don't manage the fires. The Australian Aboriginals used to manage the fires. That's how they cultivated the land. This idea that they didn't cultivate the land is bullshit. They cultivated the land, but they didn't do it how we did it in the West. We thought you cultivate land by, you make a little furrow and then you put some seeds in it and then you pat it down or whatever, and then the seeds grow, you water it, the seeds grow, and then you eat the seeds. They did it differently. They did it through fire. And basically they managed the land. They managed the land, but over vast distances. And the thing is, it's a bit like this, right? If you don't have a fire in Australian given area that normally naturally has fires, okay? Now, naturally say they're supposed to have a fire once every 2 years. But then you make it so you stop any fires from happening, and basically you don't want any fires because people live there, you don't want to lose their homes. So you make it so there's no fire in 2 years, and 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, it gets to 10 years. Now, what's happened in those 10 years is that all the dry bark of the trees, just peels off the trees, and all the dry fruit and everything else has basically fallen to the ground, and now you've got this massive 10 years worth of tinder. Not 2 years, which would be a smaller fire overall. No, 10 years, and it's a bigger area. So it's not like you can just burn a little bit and make sure everybody's out the way and all the animals have somewhere to run away to or can burrow down into the ground. And some of these trees can only germinate if they've been through fire. So it's actually part of the natural process. So to not have fires, to not manage it in any way and then go, oh shit, there's a fire after 20 years of having no fires whatsoever. That fire that you have is going to be absolutely freaking insane. And on that note, I want to mention the fact that Australia is very well and truly the canary in the coal mine when it comes to global climate change, because we're seeing more big, massive fires than ever before. Oh, and half the coral reef, the Great Barrier Reef, is gone, bleached. Anyway, right, back into the messages, because I've been ignoring you far too long, and I feel bad. I feel very bad. I feel bad. Don't worry, Deadpool. Oh, I got him back at Deadpool. Darwin Awards. Gaz Riley says, stayed with Aboriginals in Redfern, Sydney. I find Aboriginal culture incredibly fascinating. When I was over in Western Australia, I went to the Margaret River. I think that's the right name of it. The Margaret River. And I went on a bush tucker tour with a Torres Strait Islander. And that was fascinating because to be walking around and finding all this food that you would not expect to find, places you wouldn't expect to find food. I also had witchetty grub pate, which was nice. Just tasted like pate. But yeah, witchetty grubs, I've eaten them. What else did I eat? I ate all kinds of insects. I've eaten some horrible stuff in my time, but it was pretty good. It was pretty good. There was I was a bit hesitant at first, trying all this bush tucker. And then I saw there were these two little, I don't know, Dutch kids or something, and they were just like jumping in and eating all this stuff. And I just felt, oh God, if they can do it, I can do it. Wasn't too bad. But the Australian Aboriginals are very much part of the landscape. Landscape, that's a bad way of putting it. Part of the environment. They're an important. They respect their home in Australia, and they have adapted over centuries, millennia, to live in their new home. If you watch a lot of Australian kind of horror movies, I'll say horror movies. There's a lot of Australian movies like Walkabout, even like Wolf Creek, Mad Max, even you could argue, where it is this idea of people in this inhospitable terrain. Which white people in this terrain that they're not supposed to be there. There are aliens in this land, and they don't know what to do with it. And invariably they'll be helped out by someone who's Aboriginal because they've always lived there. They know how to live on that land. But unfortunately for the Aboriginals, they've been pushed out of a lot of the land that they used to live in. And also, a lot of them were nomadic. They didn't necessarily stay in one place all through the year. When the seasons changed, they moved about. And that's particularly heartbreaking for places like Melbourne, where they used to have a tribe that used to live in what's now Melbourne. They were kicked out, essentially. There was a guy called Batman, I think it was John Batman, and he bought he bought Melbourne off these local people for some beans and some coloured pebbles or something, and he took them all out and said, right, we're going to start a new town here, we're going to call it Melbourne. And after Lord Melbourne, I think was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Someone might want to check up on that one. Batman got into trouble. He got taken to court because he had broken the law. Had he broken the law by ripping off the local Indigenous Aboriginals? No, he had broken the law by trading with them for their land, because it wasn't their land under British law. It wasn't their land. They weren't citizens. They weren't really there. You could just do what you liked to them, and many people did. hundreds of thousands of Aboriginals were killed by white settlers, and you can't get away from that fact. And then in the 20th century, we had the stolen generations, and even now, things are better than they were, but in some ways, they're not even getting much better. They decided to bring in a stupid rule a few years ago. I don't know if this has been back-heeled, but this was the case when I was there, that they were finding that Aboriginal women were much more likely to have to suffer from complications in birth and actually lose the baby. And the Australian government hated this because obviously it made them look bad, as any stats willed. So they said, right, all Aboriginal women have to give birth in a hospital. White women don't. They can give birth at home in a birthing pool, listening to whale music or something. But if you live in an Aboriginal community, then you've got to have a baby in a hospital. And Aboriginal women were like, I don't want to go into the hospital. I'm scared of the hospital. I don't even know what it is. It's not part of my culture. What the hell is wrong with you idiots? And a lot of Aboriginal women were ending up leaving their town and going out into the bush to give birth, which led to more complications. And this is the thing with the Australian government, and it doesn't really matter whether it's the Liberals, who are not really Liberals, they're Conservatives, but they call themselves the Liberals, or Labour, who are like Labour but without the U. Either of them, they either try and do something which just fucks up in their face, or they just ignore the Aboriginals. And both things never seem to work. And the relationship between the white Australians, or the non-native Australians, shall I say, and the native Australians, the Aboriginals, is similar to the way that Native Americans have been treated in America, or the Native Canadians have been treated in Canada. And it's sort of varying degrees of shittiness. But when you talk about people's cultures, when you talk about their history just being wiped out, the oral tales. When I did the Bush Tucker tour, the guy who was taking us on the Bush Tucker tour, he said, people don't know how to do this anymore. My people don't know how to do this because it hasn't been taught. It used to be taught by the grandparents. They used to take the kids out and walk about, and they'd learn how to live off the land for years. And then they'll come back, and then they'll be parents themselves, and they could and that is something that has just been broken. That whole system, that whole chain, that unbroken chain for thousands of years of civilization, because it wasn't our civilization. It wasn't what we thought of civilization, but it was civilization. And I'll tell you this as well. They did have rules. The Aboriginal tribes, they pretty much had rules. And if you killed someone in your tribe, you got into trouble. If you stole something, you got into trouble. It's not like they were waiting for all these centuries, all these millennia for someone, white person, to come along and say, hey, have you heard of the Bible? Well, it goes back to Moses, doesn't it? Moses going up Mount Sinai and getting these tablets and going, oh, we're not supposed to kill people. Oh, I wonder how we've been functioning as a society, wandering through the desert these last few years, thinking that murder was okay. Thanks, God. It's a bit arrogant, to say the least. Anyway, so, yes. Saw them at Glastonbury, didn't get midnight oil. They did Beds of Burning. Gaz Riley said there's lots of Aussie music. I think the guy out of Midnight Oil went into politics. He's a bit of a tit, actually. But don't quote me on that. Homer was already passed through many generations. It's now the pinnacle of Western civilization as we know it. Well, exactly, but a lot of the Aboriginal stories were lost forever, unfortunately. Nothing wrong about being Aboriginal. They protect nature and bring peace to the world. Let's praise for the Aboriginal. Well, yes. I've never been inconvenienced by an Aboriginal. A lot of Australians, white Australians, will whinge and moan about the fact that Aboriginals can get a free place in university and they can't. And it's like, give them a break, for God's sake. I mean, seriously, is this the hill that you want to die on? Why can't we just continue being horrible to these people forever? Yeah, but they're only 1/16th Aboriginal. Well, then one of their ancestors was probably raped. For Christ's sake, can you just have a bit of compassion here? The things that we know of, the things that we think of as Australian, have a think. It's hats like this, made of kangaroo. But barbecues, I'm sorry, we have barbecues everywhere. We have barbecues in Britain. Well, kind of. We start them and then it rains, so we don't have to very long. But we have barbecues in America. In fact, barbecues were invented in America. The idea of a backyard barbecue was invented in the 1950s to sell frickin' meat to men because men didn't cook. It was seen as unmanly to cook. And they thought, how can we sell steaks and sausages to men? I know, let's have them cooking outside. So it's more like a campfire. So it's more like... It was a marketing ploy. So, okay, what else have you got? Well, your corks hanging from your hat, which nobody wears. Nobody wears that in Australia. Nobody wears these hats. I got into so much shit off my girlfriend for wearing this hat around Australia because she said only bogans wear those hats. Bogan is Australian for scally, but I assume. But yeah, and so when I think of Australia, when I think of the things that I think of as Australian and most people, I think of the boomerang. I think of the didgeridoo. I think of these beautiful paintings of lines and dots. They're all Aboriginal stuff. All of those things that people go, yeah, Australia. It's Aboriginal culture. Not white culture that's been transplanted over to Australia. It's Aboriginal culture. The sound of the outback the sound of Australia is Aboriginal. Okay, it might be pop, kind of Stock Aitken and Waterman for most people, but realistically, that unique Australian sound is the sound of the didgeridoo. It is Aboriginal. So if you're going to take all this culture from these people, the least you can do is help them out. And the problem is, like I said, they either go in too hard and they say, right, we've got this problem with women giving birth in the townships, so we're going to send, well, not they're called townships, but they may as well be, in the communities, so we're going to make them sure they go to hospital, and then that backfires. They try and help the children of these Aboriginals to be civilized, and I say that backfires. I mean, that never... It's not a backfiring, it's just a terrible, terrible idea that should never have happened with the Stolen Generations. So every time the Europeans or the Johnny-come-latelys in Australia, I always love this kind of this cartoon always sticks in my head. I was there in 2002. It was kind of a height of the boat people crisis. You know, like in the UK when 10 people come on a boat and all of the usual dickheads are going, "Oh, it's a crisis! There's a crisis! Oh, look at the crisis! Ah!" Yeah, they're the same thing in Australia, and they freak out about boat people coming over. A lot of these people were coming over from Afghanistan and then afterwards Iraq. They were risking their lives in these boats. And there was a situation in which the Australian Coast Guard were called out because a boat was sinking. And they rescued the children and the people from this boat. The amazing story that the Australian Navy, proud men and women of the Australian Navy, they saved all the people on this stricken boat that was sinking off the coast of Australia. This was reported in the Murdoch media, and let's not forget that Rupert Murdoch is Australian. Well, he's born in Australia, he's American now because of tax reasons. But he reported it in his shitty newspapers as these people were throwing these asylum seekers were throwing their children into the ocean to force the Coast Guard to pick them up so they could become Australian, which isn't what happened. Look how depraved these people are. Look how desperate they are. Desperate and depraved. They'll sacrifice their own children to get into Australia because once the children are in, they can get in too to be reunited. That's not what happened. But I always remember the cartoon in one of the newspapers, and it was it was a group of Australians on the beach in their board shorts with everything's got a different name. So Bermuda shorts in the UK is board shorts in America, in Australia. Y-fronts in the UK, budgie smugglers in Australia. Thongs in the UK flip-flops in the UK are thongs in Australia, which makes things very, very confusing. Almost as confusing as the way Americans use the word fanny to mean backside, and not the way we use it. But it was a crowd of Australians on the beach. And in the background were two Aboriginals and they're all holding placards. Boat people, go home. Australia is full. Go back where you came from. And the one Aboriginal says to the other, I wish we thought of that. And I thought, yeah, that sums it up. So, yeah, since 1901, when they brought in this act, which kind of discriminates against people who weren't white, effectively, without sort of spelling out that that's what the case was. Later on, when Australia, after the war, they got they went through a period where they tried to get as many people over to Australia as possible. They had this mantra called populate or die. And in the wake of World War II, it meant a lot of people coming over from Eastern Europe, and also Italy and Greece and places like that, which populated the Australia with more Europeans. And more latterly, we've seen a lot of people coming over from China and other countries in Southeast Asia, which kind of makes sense, more than people coming from the other side of the planet. But with every wave of immigration, the people who can trace their ancestors back to the people who were put there forcibly because they stole some apples or something. And don't forget, the convicts who were sent to Australia were sent there for pretty tenuous reasons. There were a lot of people there who were there for prostitution. There were the people who were there for apple scrumping. There were people who were there for like the minorest of offences, and they were sent over life sentence to Australia because they'll never get back. And it was pretty tough at the beginning days. But every wave of successive immigrants turns around and says, I don't want these new people coming, when things, they get to the second, third generation of these people who come from somewhere else. And the Australian Aboriginals were always there. How mad must they be? I was seeing all these people coming over and just wrecking their towns, wrecking their well, not towns, but communities, wrecking their history and wrecking their culture. So it's a bit of a problem. And I don't know what the answer is, to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of well-meaning people there who want to help Aboriginal people. There's a lot of alcohol abuse. There's a lot of sniffing glue and sniffing petrol and broken families and domestic violence. And there's a lot of crime that goes on in Aboriginal communities. But that basically comes from the fact that their lifestyle, their culture has been destroyed. What do you do now? How do you pick up those pieces? And there are places in Australia, dry towns, Aboriginal towns which are dry. People can't get hold of alcohol, which was destroying their whole way of life. I think that something that might be a good idea is for the white Western Australians, well, not just white, just the immigrants into Australia. That includes British people. That includes European people from all over Europe. That includes people coming over there from South Asia, from Africa, wherever they've come from to Australia. It might be an idea to say to the Aboriginals, look, Northern Territory, have it. Just make your own country. And you need a passport to go there. And not that any Australian watching this is going to freak out now. What do you mean? We're not giving up our land. We had to fight for that. No, you didn't. All the bloody wars that Australia fought in were pretty much either someone else's freaking war, like the Boer War or the First World War or the Korean War or the freaking Vietnam War. Here's something about Australia. You know the Anzacs, right? They fought courageously in World War One in Gallipoli when they got absolutely wiped out in Turkey. And there's a movie about it. I've forgotten the name. It's Gallipoli with Mel Gibson in it when he was very young. And those people were all volunteers. They all volunteered to join the fight for the empire, for the British Empire. It wasn't until the 60s that Australia had conscription. They didn't have it in World War II either. There was no conscription. It was all signing up. It was only when America wanted help fighting in Vietnam that Australia brought in conscription. And thousands of young Australian men were forced to fight in Vietnam. Someone else's freaking war. In someone else's... I mean, imagine fighting another continent's war in another continent. I mean, what? And the one time when Australia did actually face attack was in World War II. Darwin was bombed. Quite famously, Darwin was bombed. And the Singapore had fallen. There were Japanese soldiers in northern Papua New Guinea, in the Solomon Islands. And it did look a bit dicey. The Battle of the Coral Sea, it wasn't the British who helped out the Australians. It was the Americans who came to their aid. And since World War II, we've seen this more and more, and I wish I could explain this in layman's terms, because I think it's a bit complex, but since World War II, Britain has turned its back on Australia time and time again. You've got to understand this. They asked for our help in the Second World War, and we went, no, because we want you to come up to Normandy and storm the beaches with us. And they were like, bloody hell, we've got our own thing going on here. We're getting attacked by the Japanese. Piss off. Can we get some help? And they got no help from us. They got help from the Americans. And then after the war, that went on, and the American culture became quite a big thing in Australia. Probably how they transplanted the whole barbecue idea, and how that somehow became Australian, which I still don't get my head around. We've got lager in Australia. They don't have that anywhere else in the world. Look. Interesting fact, it's really hard to make lager in Australia because hops only grow at certain latitudes, and there's only a tiny bit of Australia that's in that particular latitude in which you can grow hops. Fascinating that. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I know. But and then in 1973, Britain famously turned its back on the Commonwealth. Up to 1973, there was a deal where it said that any country in the Commonwealth, be it Guyana or Fiji or Australia, could move. Anyone from those countries could move to the UK. It was all part of the Commonwealth. It was all open. So people moved from Jamaica on the Windrush over to the UK, and it was fine because they were Jamaican citizens, they had Jamaican passports. And then in 1973, Britain joined the EEC and turned its back on the Commonwealth because the Commonwealth wasn't making any money for it. The Commonwealth wasn't particularly rich. The rich countries of the Commonwealth were Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The population of Canada, it's 40 million now. It's smaller then. The population of Australia is 25 million now. It's a lot smaller then. The population of New Zealand is 4.7 million. It's a lot smaller then. So they looked at Europe and went, oh, you could make a lot more money trading with our next door neighbours. And Australia never really forgot that. And that's something that we forget in England. We watch Neighbours, we watch Home and Away, and they go, oh, these Aussies, they love us. They love us so much. And the reality is, and a lot of Australians never really think that much about Britain. And the ones that do have British heritage and want to come back, they used to come over here and work and stay for a bit. And less Australians are doing that now because there's other opportunities elsewhere in the world that are arguably better for them. And if they come to the UK and get themselves a residency pass, they used to be able to travel all around Europe, no problem. And now it's going to be a bit more of a problem because Britain's pulled out of the EU. So yeah, it's a complex situation. And the idea now that we're going to go, hey, Commonwealth, I know we've not been talking for the last 48 years, but I tell you what, let's be friends again. And the Commonwealth's moved on. And it's still the Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth nations, I mean, look, they've got new allies now. They've got new trade routes. They've got new things that are going on. They're not particularly interested in what the motherland. And if you look at what Britain did around the world, I don't know if the good outweighed the bad. I don't know if it did, but yeah, it gets pretty treacherous if you go down that route. So that's a lot about Australia. I've got loads more to talk about. I could probably go on for about 7 hours about Australia. Like I say, I spent a lot of time there. I've travelled around like a maniac. I might do an extra show about it, about specifically my travels around Australia, because it is a fascinating continent. If you get the opportunity to go over there, please do. Please do. And maybe go and see the Great Barrier Reef before it disappears entirely. That'll probably be a good idea. We're talking about music a little bit. Australia has produced some bloody amazing music. I mean, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, one of my favourite acts in the world. They just got a new album out. Warren Ellis, who's from Ballarat, and Nick Cave have just brought a new album out called Carnage, which came out last week, and I would recommend you to check it out. But a lot of good Aussie music and a lot of good Aussie cinema as well. When Australians do manage to make a film, they only make one a year, usually on average. They're a bit like the British in that respect. Sorry, one that's any good a year, but there are some stonking great, bloody good films. Obviously, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Mad Max, Rabbit Proof Fence, to name a few. Yeah, the cultural impact of Australia is pretty strong. I mean, they're a country that consistently punches above its weight in terms of its influence on the world and its identity being known by the world in a way that people don't know that much about other countries. And I know that sounds arrogant, and I know it sounds like, oh, well, you're bigging up Australia there, but Australia does do a very good job of bigging itself up. It does, in a way that other countries that people don't know that much about don't. America does the same. America just talks about America all the freaking time, and it works. People know stuff about America, whereas they don't necessarily know something about Gabon or Lithuania. No offense to any Gabonese or Lithuanians watching this, but yeah, you get my point. Australia is a huge identity for people, and the Aussies are very proud of who they are, and okay, that's fair enough. But what I found in Australia, and what I found kind of the reason why I'm not living there now, is I couldn't hack the casual racism. And I'll tell you a story before I go. Obviously, I'm going a bit over time now. In 2007, Christmas 2007, I bought a ticket for my friend Dino to go to the test match because he loves cricket. And so we went to the Melbourne Cricket Ground, the MCG. And we went to watch India versus Australia. Someone wants to check on Wikipedia if that's the game that was played. It was Boxing Day match, and this was a Christmas present. And we went and sat in this huge arena. I think if it seats like 60,000 people or something. It's just insane. It's a massive stadium. And we sit down, and we're talking, and someone turns around and goes, "Oh, well, mate, where are you from? And we say, "Oh, we're from Liverpool, the UK." And they say to us, "Oh, we love the UK." And they start talking about how much they love the UK. And from Liverpool, "Oh, you love the Beatles." And then one of them says, "You know what the best thing about the first of all," they said, how's your experience of Australia? And I was saying, well, I've been here quite a lot. I'm living here at the moment, and I've travelled around Australia. I've been up to the Northern Territory. I've been over to Western Australia, been to Perth, been to Darwin, been to all the state capitals apart from Hobart, which I still haven't been to. And they said, did you run into any bungs or something like that? And I went, what? Bungs? What's a bung? And say, Aboriginals. It's the name we give them because that's the noise they make when you hit them with your car. And like the glee in this guy's voice, he's saying this. And I just remember, this is my mate from Liverpool just turns to me and he's like, what the hell? Like, we're not used to this in the UK. Maybe more now since the Brexit vote. But at the time, when people were going to be racist at a stranger in the UK, they'll say, I'm not a racist, but, because something in the back of their freaking head said, being a racist isn't a very good thing. Being a racist is bad. Don't be racist. And then we went, we're going to get another drink. So we stood up with full pints, walked off. And then we sat down the other side of the bloody stadium. And we got talking to some Australians again, because obviously cricket's really boring. No offence, cricket fans. And they say to us, where are you from? We said, UK. And one of them says, like straight away, do you know what the best thing about the UK is? And we went, what? He goes, there's no effing Aboriginals there. And I'm just like dying. When you big up someone who you think is absolutely hilarious, and you say, you got to meet me mate. You got to meet me mate Gary. He's great. Gary's bloody brilliant. He's such a good laugh. And then you go to the pub with your mate who you've been bigging up, and another friend, and this mate who you've been bigging up is just a gobshite for no reason. And you're just like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. I'm cringing. I'm dying of shame. That's how I felt. And that casual racism, which I experienced, I don't mean against me, obviously not against me, but the casual racism that is acceptable to just say horrible things, especially about Aboriginal people, just really got under my skin. And it's the reason I'm not living there now. Came back to the UK thinking, well, at least in the UK, people aren't just casually racist all the time. And then Brexit happened and here we are. So yes, might not have been the best move. I don't know. Maybe I could have helped. But something else apart from so I'm trying to say the bad things, I'm trying to say the good things as well. Good things, obviously, music, cinema, but also comedy. Now, comedy in Australia is bloody brilliant, and there's two acts that I want you to check out after this. There's John Safran, who did a series called Music Jamboree. He did one called John Safran versus God. He did one called Race Relations. They are freaking hilarious. This is the guy who is Jewish, and he tried to apply to join the KKK in Australia. In America. He's sitting there with the Grand Wizard of the KKK going, can I join this organization? He's like, yeah, I don't see why not. He goes, well, because I'm Jewish. He goes, what? And the look on it, and it's pure, like, Sacha Baron Cohen territory. And he's done all these stunts all around the world. Very funny man. The other one that I really love you to check out is The Chaser. The Chaser's War and Everything. And if you can find some of the videos on YouTube, really, really, really funny comedy show. Satirical, current affairs, piss takes, setups. It's kind of like, how could I describe it? Kind of like a little bit Candid Camera meets Brass Eye. Is that a good way to describe it? I don't know. It's a brilliant TV show, but I really recommend that. So I'm going to get into some of the comments, even though it's 10 past 11. I really need to go to bed soon. But nice hat, Graham. It suits you, honey. Kisses. Thank you, David. Gaz says, someone told me there were only 15 tribes in the whole country. Yeah, there were over 250 Aboriginal tribes in Australia when Whitey turned up. I think Russell Crowe is Australian, at least in the movie where he made The Two of Us, where he played the gay role. It's filmed in Australia. Jorg says Homer was only already passed. Oh, I've read that one. My uncle has a deep sea trench halfway between Australia and New Zealand named after him. He was a petty officer on a Royal Navy survey ship in the late 1950s. The Burt Trench, seen on the charts of the Tasman Sea. That's fantastic. So between Australia and Tasmania, that's called the Bass Strait. And oh my God, I've been in there on a cargo ship. It was like being in a bloody washing machine. It was like, did see some whales though. That was cool. Saw them at Glastonbury, blah, blah, blah. Picking Hanging Rock is a very eerie film. Yeah, Picking Hanging Rock, excellent film. And also very much Peter Weir, I think, did Picking the Hanging Rock. Very much that white people in a alien land not being able to adapt to their environment. And it's a fantastic movie. It's haunting, absolutely haunting. A dream within a dream within a dream. The Saints, Radio Birdman, Cosmic Psychos, Feed Time, all good Aussie bands from Gaz. It's telling that we associate the outback with the originals, not the green valleys of Victoria. Well, that's because they were all pushed out of the green valleys of Victoria. It was like any land that was useful, we'll have this. Any land that's not useful, you can have that. See also Native Americans. Yes, India too. Elephant useful for circuses. Cash dummy. On the other hand, our European ancestors killed off all the cave bears, cave lions, mammoths and whatnot. And the Neanderthals probably too. Yes, we probably did kill off the Neanderthals. Although Europeans do have a certain percentage of our DNA, which is Neanderthal DNA. So if anyone's going on about pure humans, they're from Africa. Yeah, the Rift Valley. Go to the Rift Valley, find some pure humans in the Rift Valley near the Australopithecus afarensis, who was found there, who we call Lucy. And she was a very early human. So didn't interbreed with other humans, you see, because there used to be different humans around the planet. There was Homo sapiens. I think Homo erectus was a slightly different species of human. And also there was Homo florentes, which was the Hobbit people of Flores in Indonesia. But tangents. This is not a night for tangents, I'm afraid, because I've got too much to talk about. Beer, pretty good beer, pretty good tunes. Got some good music festivals in Australia. The Big Day Out they have in Australia. They also have the Harvest. What was it called? Harvest Time? So Harvest Festival. Is it the Harvest Festival? It can't be called the Harvest Festival. That's a silly name. Really good. So I've seen a lot of good bands in Australia as well. Not necessarily Australian bands, but I saw the Flaming Lips there. I saw the National there. I saw Sigur Rós. That's fantastic. And one of my favourite all-time comedian, piano playing people. What's his name? The guy who wrote the music for Matilda. He's very funny. He's a ginger guy. He did a song called Prejudice. Tim Minchin, that's his name. Tim Minchin. He's Australian. He lives in the UK now. He's very funny. I think Kylie lives in the UK now, and I know Nick Cave lives down in Brighton. So sorry, Australia, for taking all of your best people. Although there is a campaign to make a statue for Nick Cave in Bendigo or somewhere in Victoria where he came from, and it's Nick Cave on a horse. Whether they make it or not, I don't know. Australia is full. Yeah, right. Have they ever been to Bangladesh? Well, that's the joke, isn't it? I once drove from Polo Bay all the way to Ballarat, and I don't think another car passed us. Seriously, not another car. And that was in Victoria, which is quite populated compared to the rest of Australia. But people who say Australia is full. Australians have also, I'm trying to say this is great. This is good. And I'm trying to say, but you got to balance it out because there's some bad things. Australians are also the most polluting people on the planet per capita. Everyone thinks it's Americans. It's not. It's Australians. And they do like their detached houses. In the UK, we're all crammed in together, either terrace houses or at least semi-detached houses, whereas in Australia, pretty much all the houses are spread out. People have a lot of space and a garden that they need to water because the grass just dies because it's really hot in the summer. Jesus Christ. I've never been so hot as I've been in Australia. When I was there a few times, it's been over 40 degrees. Just insanely hot. You know, when you get into the car and you're just sticking to everything. And if you got CD on the dashboard, it is just melted. It's just melted. There you go. when I was up in Darwin, because most of Australia is a dry heat, but we get up to Darwin, it's really tropical, and you can't spend 45 seconds out in the outside without sweating profusely. It's very unsexy. Darwin, the city of unsexy sweaters. But I remember we went to the cinema. We went to the cinema because the backpackers we were staying in, they turned off the air conditioning in the afternoon to save power. It's fair enough, because like trying to air conditioning an Australian Darwinian afternoon, I mean, forget about it. And so we went out and where could we go where there's some air conditioning? We entered the cinema. We watched Amelie, film Amelie. With Audrey Tautou, and I remember we walked out of the cinema and we were just like, "Oh, that was really good. That was really good." And we like just started to sweat and like, "What should we do now?" And we turned around, like the Count of Monte Cristo was just started with Guy Pearce, and I'm like, "Should we go and watch this?" So we went back into the cinema for another 2 hours just because of the air conditioning. We weren't paying to see the movie. We just wanted the air conditioning. Saw Akadaka in Dresden in 2013. Still remember the ticket cost €180. Jesus Christ, cash dummy. That is a lot of euros to go and see AC/DC. Although if you go to Melbourne, there's an AC/DC lane. There's also in Melbourne, there's a load of really cool stuff. There's loads of history in Australia, a colonial history, and loads of beautiful colonial buildings, lots of stuff that Australia doesn't really push up that much because they say, we're a really young country. We're young. We're such a young country. Look at this thing we're built out of concrete and glass. Actually, if you go and look around Sydney, and especially in Melbourne, there are some beautiful buildings, some like old arcades, as in not video game arcades, but old shopping arcades, which is just absolutely beautiful, and lots of verandas. I love verandas. A big fan of verandas. I wish we had more of them in the UK because they keep the sun off you when it's hot, which hardly ever happens here, but it also keeps the rain off you when it's raining. Yay, let's do that. But verandas went out of fashion in the UK and we got rid of them all in the 1950s because the notion that Australia is full is a statement in that context. The most thinly populated continent after Antarctica, 25 million people. Walking around in North America feels like being on a film set because it's pictured in so many. It's very true. They like to make movies about themselves. They were racist when I was there in 1990, though not all. I pity the few. Yeah, I'm not. Obviously, come on. I'm not saying that all Australians are like this. It's just that there is that barrier that I've grown up with in the UK where people thought it was bad to be racist. That barrier doesn't seem to be there in a lot of people. And you can walk around Melbourne. You can walk around Adelaide. You can walk around Sydney all freaking day, and you would be hard pushed to see a single Aboriginal person there. And so all these people kicking off about the Aboriginals, you're like, whoa, what's the problem? Have they just fired you from your job? Did they just stolen your wife or your husband or your children from you? Have they just robbed your house? No. And it's quite telling that I think if you have a look at Captain Cooks's logs from when he actually visited what was then New Holland and he called it New South Wales, I'm pretty sure that he says that they tried talking to the native people who lived there, but the natives just seemed to want them to go away. And that was in 1770, and I'm just thinking, yeah, James, nothing has changed. Literally nothing has changed. Just please go away. Please leave my town. But yeah, the younger generation in Melbourne are more liberal. Yeah, Gaz, I mean, the younger generation everywhere are more bloody liberal. Andy McAvoy said I had that same experience recently in VR with a US dude playing poker VR on Oculus Quest 2. We were getting on really well, proper good laughs out of nowhere. Suddenly, massive racism. Andy, there's the story I'll tell you. When I was living in Panama, I had one of the guys who worked on SMS Island come and stay with me, for a few days, and we went out. He wanted to go on there's like an aerial ropeway thing going through the jungle, like a zip line going through the jungle on Bastimentos Island, and he went on that and with a friend of mine from the UK. And I'd been on it, so I just waited for them at the beach. And when they turned up a bit later on, they knew two new friends from Georgia, the state of Georgia, not the country. And Cole says to me, they seem really nice. But this is when they went off to the bar. So they seem really nice, but just wait till the racism comes out. And I thought that he was kind of like half joking. I thought he was half joking. And anyway, so a bit later on, we'd had a couple of drinks, and suddenly they made some really, really inappropriate racist joke. And the rest of us like sitting there kind of mortified. And Cole leans forward and he goes, "You do know I'm black." And they looked at him and went, "Are you?" It was just one of those moments where you're like, you have got to be freaking kidding me here. Cole, like, he's got a bloody big afro. Like, how? What? How? And afterwards, Cole said to me, you know, there's people who just, they never meet anyone who's black in real life. They grow up in white communities. They never associate with anyone who's black except they see them on the TV. And they're usually, when portrayed on TV, it's a negative stereotype or it's a negative news story about a crime that's been committed, which gets highlighted more than if it had been a white person doing exactly the same freaking crime. And same in Australia. You say to an Australian, so have you got any Aboriginal mates? It's a really good question to ask a white Australian. Have you got any Aboriginal mates? I'd like to say 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. It's usually like 99 times out of 100. That's when they pull out their friend who's 1/16th Aboriginal and say, "Oh, I used to go to university with this guy who was 1/16th Aboriginal, but I didn't talk to him because I didn't think he should have got free education for being 1/16th Aboriginal." Well, I mean, just make free education for all. That's how I feel. Duke Vengeance says, "My mother is an unapologetic racist." Sorry, I can't. I didn't mean to laugh at that. It just came out of nowhere. Can't walk around town with her saying anything that she isn't shy about it either. Ooh, Duke, that's not nasty. Sorry, I was laughing because the comment above that was the purist who said, "We fucked the Neanderthals out of existence." Possibly, yes. Catch Dummy says, "True, Graham, we are interbreeds. We are 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. People in Asia have about 2% Denisova men DNA. Africans are the purebloods." Yeah. So if anyone's going to get in the Muggle house of Muggleness, no, the Harry Potter turf school, whatever it's called, if you want your true blood wizards, then Africa's where you go for them. Does Australia have almost uncontacted Aboriginal tribes that somehow maintain the chain of generational knowledge? Pyrrhus, no. Not to my knowledge, and I don't think there's knowledge of most people in Australia. It just hasn't happened. Because a lot of the places the Aboriginals moved to, then suddenly they found gold, and so they were moved on again. And basically all the places where you can get food were taken over by European settlers. So the Aboriginals didn't live in a freaking desert. No one lived in the desert. They might have gone there for some religious pilgrimage or something, but there's no food there. So they went wherever there was food, and they were migratory. They were nomadic. Some of them stayed where they were, depending on the climate. And pretty much, I don't think there's any uncontacted peoples there. And if you think about the satellite images of it, you'd be able to spot them a mile away because you'd be able to see some kind of structures or obvious places where the people have been, unlike the Amazonian rainforest, which is covered in trees, so you don't really know what's happening down on ground level, or like the islands, the little chain of islands, was it the Andaman Islands off the coast of India, where there's one of the islands where there's no white people have ever been, and if they try and turn up, there's just a shower of arrows comes to greet them. Fantastic. I don't think there's anything like that in Australia. I'm sorry, but it does look like, for most intents and purposes, a lot of Aboriginal culture and history and law has been lost forever, and it won't come back. I mean, it's the equivalent of the Christians burning down the great Library of Alexandria, pretty much what we did, but we just did it to someone else's culture instead of our own. Cash Dummy says, "And also some very hostile ones in the North Sentinel Island and west of Myanmar. It belongs to India and is protected. Inhabitants kill arrivals on site." That's the one. Sentinel Island is part of the Andamans. Thank you. I love it when I say something and it's there. It's there in the comments. Anyone remember Bob Down, Australian comedian? No. I remember Dame Ellen Everidge, which is quite funny. Does any Briss said, "I was only joking. Everyone knows that London has racism. London's not a racist city. I mean, the times I've spent in London, it's a very multicultural world city, and it voted to remain. The places that are the most racist in the UK are the ones with the least amount of immigrants, because it's not the immigrants that they're scared of. It's the it's the fear of immigrants. It's the fear of someone moving in who you don't know, and it's just a weird thing. Xenophobia is just a weird thing. But I feel like there is a lot to learn from the Aboriginals and Australians. I don't feel pick up the mantle enough with that and make it compulsory to learn about Aboriginal. I know people learn a little bit in school, but it's not. I don't feel it's enough. You learn a lot of European history in your Australian classrooms, but I feel like learning more about the Aboriginal tribes, seeing maps of Aboriginal Australia, stuff like that, is something that I think the kids in Australia should be a bit more exposed to, so they understand their place in history and maybe just be a bit more appreciative of what they got. You know, it's kind of like an idea of like, what do you want, a T-shirt? You know, my ancestors stole, raped, and pillaged this land, and all I got was this lousy, amazing country with loads of things going for it. They call it the lucky country. It's got loads of natural resources. It's a place where you get your uranium from. It's one of the biggest coal exporters in the world. It's got a lot of natural materials, a lot of gold still. If you want to dig out the ground, mining concerns are very big in Australia. But again, when I want to say something negative, I want to balance it with something positive, so I will. There was a massacre in Port Arthur in Tasmania in 1996, around the same time that we had the terrible massacre in Dunblane in Scotland. And as a result of that, Australians banned all handguns, and they banned all anything like an assault rifle, anything like that. So the only guns you could have were long guns, and they had to be registered. Now, there were Australian politicians that knew that if they voted for this, they would be kicked out on their ear in the next election, especially like the senators from Queensland, for instance, which is a very red state. To put it like that, is a very conservative state. And they knew what was going to happen. They said, no, we're going to vote for this anyway, because we can't let a massacre like this ever happen again. And it hasn't. There hasn't been a mass murder in Australia like that since 1996. So coming up to 25 years now since that happened. And it worked in the same way that there's never been a gun massacre like Dunblane ever again in the UK, since we banned handguns and made sure that anyone who had a long gun had to be registered. Assault rifles right out. But we'll cover that in 17 and a half years' time when we get to the USA. Okay, so back onto the comments. I have a veranda. Cash dummy, I am jealous. Driving down the Stuart Highway and a road train coming the other way, 3 metre wide road, prepare to eat dust as soon as you learn to wind the windows up. There's so much to talk about. Trying to overtake a freaking road train. So for those of you who don't know, imagine a 40-foot container lorry, right? An 18-wheeler lorry. And then on the back of that is a trailer with another 40-foot container, right? And on the back of that is another trailer with a 40-foot container. And then if it's fuel, they could have four. They could have 4 segments to the road train, and they go up and down the Stuart Highway. So you need about a mile and a half to overtake these bad boys. That's fine. And when you're driving through the outback, you see so few people. And then when you do see a car coming the other way, you give them the finger. Not the bird. You raise one finger just to go like that. And you only do that about 3 times a day because there's so few people there. It's really empty and amazing and absolutely amazing. And you'll never see the stars shine so bright as you see over the outback in Australia. It is quite phenomenal. If you ever want to go stargazing, oh my God, it is phenomenal. That's called open conversation. Graham, remember the guy of Indian heritage who called James O'Brien and talked about cesspits in London? Yeah, I think that guy of Indian heritage, Cash Dummy, I think he was an MEP. Or he was in UKIP, wasn't he? Andaman is closer to Burma but owned by India. That's true. By the way, I need to work this one out. Are we going to go with Burma or are we going to go with Myanmar? Because if I go with Burma, then I'm going to be talking about Burma in just a few weeks, whereas if I go for Myanmar, I'm not going to be talking about it for at least 3 years. So if someone wants to let me know whether they want me to call Myanmar, Burma, or Burma, Myanmar, let me know. Met Police are the most racist police force in the UK, says Marcus Rashford. Come on, Graham, you checked under the big number of videos in London of racist cases inside the tube. Yeah, but I don't know if that's particularly representative, and the people who are on the tube, they don't seem to come across as Londoners. I know that sound like a bit weird, but they just the certain class of wankers that move to London, and the videos that I've seen of people being horrible and racist, it felt a bit like that. I've got a super chat, yay, from Andy McAvoy. Thank you, Andy. Five good British pounds. 5 Brexit shekels, because you almost said, does Australia have an uncockable tribes? Not to my knowledge, about 3 minutes ago. Yes, they've been uncockable. Sorry about that. It was buffering. I was buffered. Patrick McCarthy, some people from Norfolk I know are xenophobic because they never see anyone from outside their small community. Not exactly. It's the fear. It's xenophobia, racism and bigotry. It's all driven by fear. And you'd find 99 times out of 100 that once someone sits down with someone from the group of people who they dislike for whatever reason, and they end up getting along and having a drink together and putting the world to rights, their prejudices sort of slip away a little bit, which is why I encourage people to travel so much. Pira says, do both, 2 episodes on Burma / Myanmar. Yeah, because an hour isn't long enough. I've gone into an hour and a half now on this one, and I'm still not even halfway through the things that I wanted to talk about. There's so much in Australia. Obviously, I talked a little bit about the Great Barrier Reef. I haven't touched on the freaking wine. Oh my God, why did I not even mention the wine? I haven't mentioned the Garn, the train that runs across Australia, and there's also the Indian Pacific train, which runs, so the Garn goes up and the Indian Pacific train goes across. I'm talking about the animals. Jesus Christ, the snakes, the spiders, everything's trying to kill you. Like, they've got the most venomous snakes, they've got the most venomous spiders, they've got huntsmen, they've got whitetails, there's crocodiles, there's saltwater crocodiles who just want to bite your head off. Even the fucking gum trees, like the trees try and kill you. If you camp under a gum tree, they can drop their branches. If they don't have enough water, they just drop a bloody branch. You're told never ever to camp under a gum tree, even if it's dead hot and you want some shade, because you might just get squished by a branch. Even the bloody kangaroos, right? They're supposed to be vegetarians, they're supposed to be herbivores, right? You're driving along the Nullarbor, which means no trees, right? The Nullarbor exists. It's between South Australia and Western Australia. You've got this big straight road. I think there's a bit of the road called 90 miles straight. Literally 90 miles of straight road, okay? And what happens at dusk is these bloody kangaroos, they stand at the side of the road ready to jump on your freaking bonnet of your car. And you're like, why would you do this, Mr. Kangaroo? Why are you doing this to me? And it's probably because the kangaroos and the snakes and the spiders and the crocodiles and the baking heat and the forest fires are just saying the same thing that the Aboriginals are saying. That's nice. When are you leaving? Which should be my cue, I think. So finally, I'm just going to leave it. We need an Australian V2. I might do another episode on Australia at some point, because obviously it's a country that is close to my heart, and I spent a lot of time there, and I love the place, and I have this. I don't have a love-hate relationship with it. I think it's a country, it's pretty cool, but it could do a little bit better. And I'll probably talk about Australia a little bit more when I come to New Zealand, because I'll probably do a bit of compare and contrast in their histories and in what they're like today, possibly as a result of those histories. So thank you very much for joining me. I'm just, all I can think now is all the things I haven't talked about. I haven't talked about Anzac biscuits, which are the best biscuits in the world. I haven't talked about Arnott's pizza shapes, which are these snacks that you have. They're like a Jacob's cream cracker, but they're crispier and thinner, and they come with pizza flavoring on, and you just sit there eating them while watching TV. Lamingtons, these amazing little dessert squishy things. I've got loads of good things. And I don't have time. Although I will say this before I go, and thank you everyone for joining me. I'm sorry if I didn't mention someone's super chat. If someone got a super chat to me I didn't have my YouTube video messaging up. I'm going to try and get it up now. Oh, there you go. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly run through all of the messages. I know it cuts out after a bit. I got Andy McAvoy's message there for the super chat. Yeah, okay, so I've gone up to the beginning. All right, just checking, because I didn't want anyone giving me money for this, and I've just ignored them. I'd feel very, very bad indeed. So, yes, the biscuits are the best. They do really good biscuits. But the mayonnaise in Australia is fucked. Like, seriously, what is with the mayonnaise? Honestly, you know, like, it looks like tuna sandwich, bukkake. Hashtag just saying. Apparently, during the early days of Australia, they couldn't get all the ingredients they needed to make mayonnaise, like you get mayonnaise in Europe, in the UK, Hellmann's mayonnaise. So they kind of made their own based on what they could remember mayonnaise was like. I don't know. It's just really wrong. It's just something that you don't want your sandwich to look like. So Australia, just between friends, we are friends. Just say, can you be a little less racist? Be a little nicer to the Aboriginals, and for God's sake, learn how to make mayonnaise, will you? Jesus. So that's it for this week. I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. with Brexit reality. Hopefully I'll be awake by then. And thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for all the chat. Thanks for all the memories that have come up here, and the facts. I love the facts. Fact me till I fart. And cold baked bean sandwiches. Anyway, so until then, thank you for joining me. Thank you for all my patrons. Thank you for the super chats, and for everyone who supports me in all these videos that I keep putting out day after day throughout this third lockdown, which might end in June if we're lucky. But until next time, I will say fair winds and following seas, traveller.